You're listening to The Topcast, the original podcast for growth-minded instrumental music and voice teachers since 2015, with your host, Tim Topham. Our mission at Top Music is to empower instrumental music and voice teachers to find and nurture their innate creativity so that they can teach lessons that are innovative, integrated, and inspiring, and that will have a positive, lifelong impact on their students. Join us each week as we interview teachers and creators from around the world and unpack fun and exciting ideas to maximize your teaching and studio business success. Welcome back to the Topcast, everybody. It's Tim Topham here, your host, and I'm delighted to be spending some time with you again today. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, over in our Top Music Pro membership, one of our special features is what we call Method Book of the Month. Each month, one of our team members, Anna Marie, interviews and explores in depth a different method published by composers all around the world. And we recently explored a collection that you may not have heard of, but is incredibly aligned with the top music pillars and the top music approach. It is, of course, the Meridee Winters Music Method, and I'm joined today by one of her team members and close and longtime collaborators, the amazing Kate Capps. Kate discovered music at 5 years old after inheriting a piano from a neighbour's basement. Recognizing her immediate love for the instrument, her parents signed her up for lessons and Kate's career as a musician was born. Songwriting quickly became a passion and led Kate to Berklee College of Music, where she studied songwriting, voice and piano. In 2007, Kate began working with Meridee Winters as a teacher for her Philadelphia school, where she taught piano, voice and songwriting, and fell in love with Meridee's creative approach to teaching music. Over the past 17 years working with Meridee, Kate's role has evolved into Meridee's right-hand person and editor for her trailblazing books and materials, while still remaining actively involved with the school's teachers, curriculum and events. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Kate. It's great to meet you.
Thank you. It's so great to meet you too, Tim.
So let us know the story about how you came to be working with Meridee and maybe a little bit about your own background.
Yeah, sure. So I'm kind of a lifelong musician. I've been singing since I could speak, is what my family says. So it was not a surprise that I ended up going to college at Berklee College of Music in Boston. So I went there. My degree is actually in songwriting. And then, but I did study piano and voice while I was there. And then after college, I headed back to the Philadelphia area, which is where my family's from. And I remember there was a time I was interviewing for jobs. I just moved back and I had 2 interviews on one day. And I went to the first interview in the morning. And I hope you don't mind this like semi-long-winded story, but I think it is like such a good representation of what Meridee stands for. But the first interview I went to in the morning was kind of one of those standard, it was like a music studio in the back of an instrument store, which is fine. And great lessons happened there too, I'm sure. But it was like a stark gray room. And I went in and they just made sure I could play a bit. And maybe it was like a 10-minute interview. At the end, they're like, okay, yeah, you want to work here? And I'm like, I guess. But then I left that and I thought, well, it would be rude to cancel this second interview. And I probably should do the grown-up thing of like explore all my options. So I went to the second interview of the day, which was at the Meridee Winters School of Music. And I remember I walk in the door and it was like a rainbow explosion. There were books on the walls and posters about creativity and tambourines and xylophones. And I sit down and I do the interview and they cover the standard things too, of, play a minor scale and make sure I can play. Same stuff the other people did. But in addition, they had me make up a song on the spot about an animal. And this was 17 years ago. So I don't remember the exact song, but I remember being really proud that in the moment I rhymed sow with cow because I was singing about a pig. But I just remember also being blown away that they were looking for that in a job candidate because what they stand for is actually creativity and playfulness. So no surprise, I took the job with Meridee. And now, 17 years later, I'm still working with her. But over time, it evolved that I started working with her on her creative books and materials.
Wow. What was meant to happen, I think, wasn't it?
Right. So didn't fail on that second interview. I don't know what I'd be doing right now. Yeah.
Interesting too for listeners as well, just the impact that our physical spaces can have too. And just how important that is. I mean, some teachers listening will be teaching in someone else's school or an elementary or high school or whatever. And so there's little that you can do about the room that you're teaching in there. But if you're teaching from home or you have your own space that you have control over, I think this story from Kate really speaks to the fact that it's important to have a vibrant, welcoming, colourful, buzzy kind of space. And what can you do to make that happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
So can you now give us a little bit of Meridee's background and how she came to her approach? Do you know that story?
Yes, for sure. So Meridee's background originally was actually, well, she's a lifelong musician as well. So she's got that broad musical background, but her career started actually as like an elementary classroom teacher. So she got her certification in teaching and she was teaching in, grade school classroom. And early on became quickly disheartened about how there wasn't an emphasis on creativity. And things have come around now. Now we've got more STEAM programs. I mean, we can always use more creativity. I'm sure you agree with that. But especially back then, there was not a lot of space. And not even that, there was resistance to her trying to introduce creativity. So she ended up leaving the classroom system and the school system. And then there were some other little stops. She owned a chain of karate schools at one point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's had an amazing life. But then she ended up working in recording studios and kind of it just evolved that she found this gig teaching, adult musicians, maybe singer-songwriters, people like that, how to accompany themselves. Because they were just running into this need again and again that there might be vocalists, but they couldn't play at all. So they couldn't practice and they couldn't really write on an instrument. So she ended up throwing together this crash course of how to teach patterns like arpeggios and chords. Because if you can learn, basic chords, then you can read a chord chart, then you can write a chord progression. And then as things evolved and she started applying her elementary education background and her music background into teaching kids, she found that the same chord crash course applied well to kids. And then she could integrate all these things. She could integrate her elementary education background and her love of creativity and this new thing she was developing around chords and patterns and teach lessons. And then that just snowballed from there. So it grew into the school and then eventually into publishing these books and these materials worldwide.
Well, it aligns obviously very well with my beliefs about what we should be teaching.
Yeah. You guys are so aligned. And I feel like you from Australia and her from Philadelphia, just kind of changing the world with creativity, just spanning.
Well, I'm only sorry that it's taken me this long to make connection with you guys and her team, but I'm glad we're doing it now because there's the books which we'll talk about in a moment. Clearly, are super aligned to anyone who follows my work. So, listeners of the podcast who know about my approach, and I think it's just great. I love seeing how other teachers structure the kinds of both creative but sort of chord-based approaches to teaching, and every teacher and every student is different as well. So different things resonate with different people. So that's why I think it's just great to share more approaches like this. So Meridee, so she's got the music school. Is she still doing karate schools or that's closed?
So that was a fun little stop along the way of her journey.
Got it. All right. So she's got the one music school. So that's a commercial location, multiple teachers. Am I picturing the right kind of thing?
Yeah, so a lot of it's in-home lessons. It's all in the Philadelphia area. A bunch of in-home lessons, but some lessons taught in that same Rainbow Explosion Music School. I'll keep expanded within the building a bit. And then some online lessons as well.
Okay, all piano, or does she have other instruments?
Other instruments. Piano is probably the same that you find with the teachers who are following your site and things. It's primarily piano. That's the big one. But still other things, guitar. Occasionally it'll be like French horn and things like that. Yeah.
Got it. All right. And then she's got the book publishing as well, which is what you help in with particularly.
That's what I work on her. Yeah, work
Great.
with her.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's unpack that in a second. But I wonder if you could distill, I guess, the core philosophy of this method. Because a lot of teachers are tossing up all the time, I guess, saying, new things are coming on the market, new ideas from here and there, and everyone's writing method books. It's hard to know how they are different, number one, but also how they align with a teacher's own philosophy. So what would you say that would be for her?
Yeah. And this is where I also think that it's going to overlap so much with what you're doing because it's so much of it is in creativity and the approach and just the joy of music. But there's a lot to it. But if I had to distill it down, it would be that music is a creative art in its nature, and music is a language art. And there are even some pieces of math in music, but a lot of the standard approaches to teaching music don't teach it that way. So, for example, with music being a creative art, that's part of her core philosophy. It is, right? But a lot of methods, the place they start is this is C, play it. This is D, play it. This very rote and recall thing. But why not say this? And I've literally done this with my own 7-year-old as we started exploring the piano. Like, okay, those are C, D, and E. Let's start with just those three. Let's make up a song using C, D, and E. So if you're just creating from the very beginning, you're using the higher level thinking, but there's also more ownership and more pride with what the kids are doing. And then similarly, if we look at music as a language art, Meridee has this great quote, and I'm going to try and directly quote her, which is, music is a language art, and we don't expect kids to be able to read before we teach them to speak. So why would we expect kids to be able to read music before they play music? And so much of the current approaches are kind of gatekeeping all the cool sounding music until after you can fluently read, that kids just quit. And they don't get to experience like a great sounding song right away. But this is kind of where the math and the patterns come in. If you can teach, and I'm talking about kids because that's our primary audience, but this 100% works with adults too. If you can teach the patterns of music right away, the first or second lesson, and I think, again, this overlaps so much with what you've been saying. If you teach those patterns right away, you can be playing really great sounding music on your first lesson if you're not requiring that people need to be able to read it first.
Yeah. I hope, Kate, that it's what you've said is becoming less and less a thing, that idea that we just read from the start. I genuinely believe that things are shifting and changing and have been over the last 10 years, I guess, that I've been doing this anyway. And 17 for Meridee. That you use the word gatekeeping. I haven't used that phrase before, but there is a sense of that in some ways. It's like, no, that is what we're doing in some ways when we hit the reading hard at the start. We are kind of gatekeeping the real immersion in music and musicality that can come from just playing music.
Exactly. And enjoying it and getting into the flow, improvising. There's so many great things if you just kind of for a second shift your focus away from reading. And that's not to say that we don't also teach that at Meridee School. We think that's great, but this is just a supplement that if you're learning music, you can use this too.
So I was going to ask about that actually. So where does the reading fit in the more traditional music? Because I assume you're still playing written music by the contemporary composers, classical music as well. How does that fit into the mix? And we'll talk about the books in a second, so maybe that's a better time, but are the books kind of a starter and then you move into more the intermediate repertoire, or is it alongside?
I would say it can be a supplement or a standalone, because we do occasionally have people, and this has actually randomly happened a lot with retirees who send us emails or give us Amazon reviews. So there are some people using these books and this approach, the chord approach, as a standalone method because their goal was just to learn how to play in a band where you need to play chords and progressions. Or maybe they even played, long ago, more traditionally and wanted to learn that. So it can be a standalone, but I think a lot of your audience and the teachers in our school are using it as a supplement. So they're still using a standard lesson book that is going to teach. I mean, you do still need to learn where middle C is and how to read music. But at the same time, you can start with this method, so kind of in tandem, and be in the very same lesson. You're going to cover your lesson book stuff. And then you're going to spend time in Chord Quest or Chord Crash Course playing these patterns and then creating your own song. Or then it's like add lyrics or go ahead and create a creative spin of that.
Well, I love that because for a lot of teachers, it's a big stress to change method completely. So to hear that these books can be used supplementally to the approach that you're already using, I think sounds great. It also, the research that I've done on these books, that for teachers listening who use my notebook beginner approach, which really sort of lays out the first up to 10 lessons with no reading, you can really get value from Meridee's books as what happens next, how you can continue using some of those notebook kind of concepts into your future lessons.
Top Music Pro enables you to be a pro in your own studio because you don't have to reinvent the wheel and you don't have to make up all the answers yourself. You have support.
I think of Top Music as the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. This site is the whole pot of gold, and there's gold pieces in there that I didn't even know existed.
I am actually teaching a full studio. They're coming online from miles away. So I am certainly thriving.
So what Tim has done is build a global community of piano teachers who are interested, who are engaged. And when you become part of this community, you feel empowered.
My life is different now because I'm not just in an isolated little studio. I have learnt that there are other people out there going through very similar learning curves and sharing these ideas.
I've really gained a lot of skill sets where my teaching is far more creative, far more innovative. I have resources so that I can add to it things that I didn't know.
My life and my business are different now because I have the three things that I really wanted: less stress, more money, and more time.
It's going to be fun. Like, I got excited about being a piano teacher. It's revolutionized everything that I do.
I think I've become a more thoughtful teacher, a more organized teacher. The quality of my teaching has deepened.
I feel like I can do this. I feel a sense of hope. I love the creativity it fosters and the openness to thinking outside the box, and it's energizing.
Joining Top Music really solidified that. Like, no, this is your career and you can make a career out of this. That has really helped me be proud of what I do.
It's made such a tremendous impact on the way I think about teaching. It keeps your mind open when you have so many ideas.
My best win from being on Top Music Pro is just having a lot more peace of mind as a teacher and as a business owner. It just gives me that less amount of hours that I have to do with research and everything.
It's a really good place to spend a few pounds, a few bucks a month. What you get from it far outweighs what you have to pay into it.
My biggest win with Top Music Pro was increased student retention and increased income. I have a lot more confidence in how I'm teaching, and I have the resources that I need when I do have questions.
I probably went from about 35 students to maybe like 65. I ended up doing 3 classes and I had a waiting list.
If I hadn't signed up with Top Music Pro, I probably wouldn't have realized that teaching piano is a real job and you can build your whole career around it.
So let's talk about I think there's 2 main series: Chord Crash Course and Chord Quest.
Yes. So they are essentially the same content for 2 different age groups. Chord Crash Course.
Okay.
And it's going to teach the basics, through arpeggios and chords and then progressions. And by the time you get to the second book of that series, more advanced things. We're getting into inversions and sevenths and things like that. And that book's been around the longest. But then what we realized was for younger kids, so maybe more in the ages like 7 to 10, they would benefit from a bit of a slower pace and a more repetition. So the Chord Quest books took that same content and expanded it over 4 books. So you would not choose both series if you were maybe middle school and up. Do they call it middle school in Australia?
Mm-hmm, yep.
Okay.
So ages sort of 12 up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 11, 12 up, you probably would do Chord Crash Course. And that's the one we have some adults using. But for that younger generation of learners, they would use Chord Quest. And Chord Quest 1 and 2 are the equivalent of Chord Crash Course. But they earn badges. There's like a cartoon villain that you have to defeat. So it's definitely made a little more playful and geared towards that audience.
Got it. Okay. And so, would you guys call it a method? Or is it, what would you call it?
We would call it a method. That's what we refer to. And the Meridee Winters Music Method that's actually our website, MerideeWintersMusicMethod.com. It is a method because it is, chord and pattern based. But we still say it works great with other methods. We're not saying use this method, this method. We're saying fill in the gaps of creativity and playfulness and things that you need with this method.
So I guess teachers are often looking for beginner methods that work for teenagers. And I'm thinking this chord crash course could be perfect because you're not sort of fixated on, well, let's say it's boring. Let's say middle C, middle, D. It's boring. Let's be honest here. You're not fixed. And a 7-year-old, you can make that fun, and that's okay. But for a teenager, you've got to make the music sound real and fun and like the music they're listening to as quickly as possible if you want to keep them. So would that be the right kind of approach for them?
Yeah. So for a 14-year-old, definitely chord crash course over chord quest, because I feel like a 14-year-old is not going to get into the Baron von Boring like a 10-year-old would. But I would do chord crash course. And what would be great if this was a 14-year-old is once you can learn, first we kind of teach the arpeggio triad because that's going to be easier physically. And then we say, okay, now play it all at the same time. Here you go. Now you can play a chord. As soon as they have that skill, you can say, what's your favorite song right now? And they tell you. And then you quickly write out a very simple chord chart. They're probably still going to play triads at first. But especially if it's a really straight ahead chord progression, they can learn the whole verse or maybe verse and chorus of whatever their current favorite song on Spotify is. And I did that. I did that with 11-year-olds too. And I would at first usually transpose it to C. Later in the books, we get into transposition, especially if they want to sing. But in the very beginning, just transpose it to C. Make it easy. But they're playing the chord progression to their favorite song.
Yeah, it's what I do in a first teenage lesson. Chord straight to chords, or at least, because sometimes the coordination's not there, so at least blocked fifths, or even just a bass note, play along with the YouTube, something like that. It's
with a cool chord sound. So much, yeah.
Yeah. And look, there's lots of time. I think another thing that gets teachers hung up is that there's so little time, and we've got to do the important, meaningful things, which is they've got to learn to read. And ultimately, though, the thing is that these students, particularly when they're starting in their teenage years, they will quit if you don't connect with them. So if there's not that rapport, and if they're not learning music which they're enjoying, it just will happen. There are very few students. It's the 0.1%ers who will want at that age to learn the old traditional way and play a lot of classical music. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of teenagers that love classical music. But on the whole, you've got to hook them and you've got to keep them hooked. And this is just a great way. So I'm so glad that you guys are doing something so aligned to what I've always believed in.
Yeah, changing the world. Here we go.
That's right. Now, are there supplemental materials as well that go along with these books?
Yeah. So there's supplemental materials for the individual books. We've got a site called MW Fun Stuff, and we link to it in the book. And that's where you go and you can print out additional. Some of them come with little worksheets, things like that. We're working on building that out to have even more. So some of the videos that I've been shooting here to kind of train on how to teach it, eventually adding some tracks and things like that. And those go specifically with the books. And when you buy the book, it's right in there. It says, go to MW Fun Stuff to get more, But then we've got additional supplemental things to use within lessons too. Meridee's got game books. There's a game book for those little young beginners, with a bunch of things. There's even, when we talked about note reading, there's a note reading game book. And then she just released a mode book. So we're going through the modes and talking about those, and then teaching if somebody's into improvising. There's a lot of focus on improvising with the modes. So there's a bunch of different stuff out there and a bunch of stuff in the works too.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask you, what are you and Meridee working on at the moment? Can you give us a little sneak peek, little teaser of what's coming?
Yeah. So like I said, we are working on building out the supplemental materials for stuff. So as long as people kind of keep checking back with us, whether they check our site or sign up for our mailing list, they'll get an announcement when that happens. But adding, like I said, tracks and some training materials to those sites. And then she's working now on some other things that are really songwriting focused, which is exciting to me because, like I said long ago, I got my songwriting degree, and I never actually thought I would use my songwriting degree. I was like, we'll just do this, but look at me, I'm using it. She's working on songwriting materials. Eventually, a lot of people have asked for a Chord Crash Course 3 because right now the current book, if you finish the Chord Crash Course series or Chord Quest, leaves off, you end up learning sevenths. You're doing some blues things, but as we know, there's a bunch of chord theory and additional tensions and different types of things, non-diatonic chords. There's so much. So eventually Chord Crash Course 3 as well.
Wow. Okay. Do you do, because I love suspensions and ninths, is that coming later or is that in the first two?
sus chords are in Chord Quest 4 and Chord Crash Course 2. They're in there because they sound so good. And, it's just a simple sus chord. It sounds good, but it's not hard to play. So
That's right. Yeah. And students know the sound because you hear it a lot. And I find a lot of the chord work that we as teachers can do with students is actually kind of giving them knowledge and background, the brains behind the music, I guess, of the music they're listening to, and to help them understand, oh, yeah, that's just that. Or I like that because, oh, that's that chord and I can actually play that. So, yeah, geez, it sounds just fantastic that you guys are working alongside me in a different country, but, trying to achieve those same kind of goals, which is really just immersion for students in music. But I think the other thing that I've learned, and I'd love your thoughts on this as well, Kate, is that the more work we do with chords, the deeper our students' understanding of music is. Would you agree with that? We go from this surface level, which is note reading, to a really functional, foundational, harmonic understanding of music.
Yeah, no, I think that's true because once we teach them what these, and then I say chords, but a lot of it's patterns too, especially we get into some arpeggio patterns in this book. And once we teach students patterns, we're also teaching them to look for the patterns. So they start pointing them out, or they'll point out in another song, hey, we played this chord progression before, and I didn't even realize my favorite song is also a 1-5-6-4 because so many songs are 1-5-6-4. But they start finding those in music. And then another book that we made semi-recently is a song book that kind of took those standards, some of those classical songs and things like that, and we tried to point out where there's patterns show up.
Yeah. You've described exactly what I call integrated music teaching, which is where we help students find those connections between different elements of music in songs that they're doing now, songs that they've done in the past, within the song that they're learning, find the patterns, find the connections, make that deeper understanding. But it takes teachers to help students find those connections at the start before they'll start to be able to do them themselves. And that's why I like scaffolding that kind of approach for teachers. Sounds like something that's also part of these books.
People can't see. I'm just going to put my hands in the air. Thanks so much. And then the part where Meridee loves to take it further, and that I, with my songwriter heart, think is so important. If we're doing that scaffolding and you're teaching the pattern, then they find the pattern, that next step and that part that is really like the higher level thinking in terms of how people learn is, okay, you played the pattern, you spotted the pattern somewhere else. Can you create your own song with that pattern? Go ahead. And that's just that final step that just gives them so much pride. And we end up with beautiful, beautiful music by some of these students.
One of my foundational courses that I teach students, or frameworks that I teach teachers, I should say, is called 4-chord composing, where we unpack the circle of fifths and how we can use that to make pop-sounding progressions. Does that feature in the chord crash course?
The circle
that
of
idea?
Fifths, we reference. We don't use the circle of fifths necessarily as a starting point. But 4-chord composing, I think we definitely touch on it, because in some chapters, we've got one, I think, where it is. It's like, this is your 4-chord concert. We're going to take a 4-chord progression. We're going to play it a bunch of different ways with a bunch of different styles. We'll point out that this 4-chord progression has been used in so many songs. So it sounds different than what you're doing, but still, once again, complementary to what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Such great synergies and alignment. Which I knew it was going to be worth having you on the show, Kate. So thank you for sharing this, and thank you to Meridee. Hopefully she's going to listen to this and can find out how much love there is and for her work, because this all came about because Anna Marie, who works in our membership, did Method of the Month.
Well, I'll confess I totally watched it. She emailed me, so I was just so grateful and glad to see it.
Yeah. So each month we focus on a new method in our membership, and Anna Marie chose Meridee Winters. I'm like, oh my, what? Yeah, and I had because I think I invited her on a show years ago, and then we never followed up. And I thought, why have I've forgotten about this? And I'm so glad that we've been able to bring it back. So to the Top Music Pro members listening, make sure you go and explore inside our Method Book of the Month group, so you can find out more about this, where to find the books, etc. For all the listeners out there, if you haven't explored Meridee Winters' books, then Kate, let us know. Where do we go to find out more, and where do we go to find them?
Yeah, it's just Meridee Winters Music Method.com. In preparation for this podcast, I actually just put a thing on there that'll pop up that if you wanted to, you could sign up. And I made a little sampler of some method for people. If for whatever reason anybody has issues accessing that or some kind of pop-up blocker up, they could just literally email me directly, which is books@merideewinters.com.
Great. All right. And Meridee, Meridee, Meridee Winters. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kate. Now, have we forgotten anything before we wrap this show up that we haven't mentioned that we should have?
I don't think so. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much. And similarly, I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing. I just feel like we're bringing more creativity into the world and trying to broaden the way people make music. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention was while I've worked for Meridee for 17 years, I think she's been at this, for about twice that long. So I just want to give her credit. A long time building. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We'll put links in our show notes as well. If anyone missed those links, head to topmusic.co/episode 375. Kate, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me today.
It's been great. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Kate today. If you're interested in Meridee's publications, definitely go and check them out. I think if you've been following my work for any period of time and you love the chord-based approach that I explore, the 4-chord composing, the 12-bar blues, all of those kind of fun things, I think you'll really align well with this approach and the books themselves. So yeah, definitely go and explore them, check them out, and I'd love to hear what you think. Well, that's it for the show today. Thank you so much for tuning in. It really means a lot to me. And remember, we do have our voicemail open. So if you've got a guest that you would like me to interview, maybe it's you. If you've got a topic you'd like me to cover or anything else, any other feedback, I would love to hear it. Just head over to topmusic.co/message. Click the big orange button and record your message. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Until next week, I'm Tim Topham and you've been listening to the Topcast. How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today. If you enjoy this show and want to hear more of our work, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening today. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, visit us at topmusic.co/podcast or check out the show notes. I'm Tim Topham. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy your week ahead, and I'll catch you next time.